On the second Tuesday of March, a man I had never met called my house and asked, very politely, how my breathing had been lately. He was not a doctor, he was not selling anything, and by the time I set the phone down, I understood that somebody had already sold him the right to ask. I stood there in my own kitchen with my hand still on the receiver, and the thing I could not work out was this. How does a stranger in an office 300 miles away come to know my birthday, my shoulder surgery, and the name of the little clinic where they did it when I have never in my life filled out a form for him? My name is Ellis Renner. I am 76 years old. I spent 41 years climbing wooden poles for the Ketchum Valley Electric Cooperative in the Missouri Ozarks, the last 19 of them as a line foreman, which mostly means you stop climbing and start deciding who does. Before I go one step further, I want to know something about you, because it is going to be a long evening, and I would rather not spend it talking to the ceiling. Look around whatever room you are sitting in and find me the oldest thing in there that still works. Not the oldest thing you own, the oldest thing that still does its job. A percolator, a wind-up clock, a hand drill, a wedding ring. Tell me what it is, and tell me what town it is working in tonight, and I will read every one of them. Mine is hanging on a 16-penny nail by my back door, and it has been hanging on some nail or other since 1968. It is a brass padlock, number 7, stamped with my initials by a man in the co-op shop who did that for every apprentice who lasted a year. One lock, one key. The key lives on a bootlace. If you have never worked around electricity, that lock is going to seem like a small thing, so let me tell you what it means, because everything else I am going to say tonight sits on top of it. When a crew has to work a line, you do not simply shut the power off. Shutting it off is nothing. Anybody can pull a switch, and anybody can push one back. So you open the switch, and then you ground the line so it cannot come alive by accident, and then every single man who is going to put his hands on that wire hangs his own padlock on the hasp and clips his own tag under it with his name and the date written in his own hand. And here is the rule. The switch does not close until the last lock comes off, and nobody takes off your lock but you. Not your foreman, not the man who owns the company, not your father. You hung it, so you take it off, and if you are dead or in a ditch somewhere, then the switch stays open until somebody finds you. I have hung that lock on hundreds of switches. Once a month, ever since I retired, I take it down off the nail, put a drop of oil in it, and write the date on the back of the tag with a carpenter's pencil. There are 41 years of dates on that tag, front and back, in handwriting that has gotten worse but has never gotten different. My wife used to say, I was the only man she knew who kept a diary made entirely out of Tuesdays. Her name was Ruth. She died in 1999, in April, at 51 years old, of a cancer that started in one place and did not stay there. We had one son, Dale, who is 51 now himself, which is a number I do not enjoy thinking about. Dale is married to Kathy, who is a good woman and who I will get to, and they have one daughter, my granddaughter Nell, who is 29 and who is, as of 2 years ago, a second-step apprentice lineman at the same cooperative where I gave my life away one pole at a time. That is the whole family. 4 people and a dog that belongs to Kathy and has never once liked me. Now, about that phone call. The man on the other end had a voice like a church usher. He said he was calling to do a health update, and he said the words health update the way you would say afternoon walk, like it was a thing everybody agreed on. He asked how I was sleeping. He asked whether I was still driving. He asked, and this is the one that stopped me, whether I had been hospitalized since January. I told him I had had a shoulder rebuilt in January, and that it hurt when the weather turned, and that I would appreciate knowing who he was. He gave me a company name I did not catch, and a case number I did not want, and he said, and I want you to hear this the way I heard it, he said, we appreciate you, Mr. Renner. It should be about every 90 days going forward. Every 90 days going forward. I did not yell at him. 41 years of climbing teaches you that panic is just a way of falling faster. I thanked him. I wrote the time down on the pad by the phone the way I have written down every call I ever took on a storm night, and then I called the number back. A woman answered, cheerful as a bank. I gave her my name and the case number, and she read something off a screen and said, in the exact tone you would use to tell a man his oil change was ready, she said, yes, sir, Renner, Ellis, that file is closed to funding. And then she paused, and then she said, I am sorry, sir. May I ask who is calling? I said, I am the file. She hung up on me, not rudely, the way you hang up when you have just learned you are not allowed to be talking to someone. I went and sat down in Rook's chair, which I do not do often, and I looked at that brass padlock on its nail across the room, and for the first time since my wife died, I had the feeling that somebody had gotten out to the pole ahead of me and thrown the switch while I was still on the ground. I want to be fair to my son here, and I am going to try to be fair to him for the whole of this story, because a man who only tells you the ugly half of his own child is not telling you anything at all. When Ruth got sick, Dale was 24 years old and had a job at the feed store and a girlfriend he was scared of losing. Every Tuesday for 11 months he drove his mother to Springfield and back, an hour and 40 each way, and sat in a plastic chair in a room full of women in headscarves and read her the ball scores out loud because she liked his voice better than the radio. He never once let me take a Tuesday. He said, "You work, Dad." He was right. I did work. I worked a lot of Tuesdays that I would give back now if there were a place you could go to do that. So do not let anybody tell you that the man who did what he did to me was a stranger to love, or that he never gave anything. He gave. He gave more than I did, in the one stretch that counted most, and I have never once been able to set that down. It is just that somewhere between then and now, my son learned to carry a calculator where that used to be. The January before the phone call, we had an ice storm come through the valley that put 900 of our members in the dark for 6 days. I am retired, but retired around here means you still go stand in the yard at 4 in the morning with a thermos and get in the way. On the second morning, I went down on the ice in my own driveway, like a dropped ladder, and tore the shoulder up so thoroughly that the surgeon showed me the picture twice because he was proud of it. They told me I would be in a sling for 10 weeks and no good for signing my own name for at least 3 of them. Propane was due, county taxes were due. The co-op wanted a signature on my retiree paperwork. So I did what any sensible man does, and I want to be very clear that I would do it again. I drove to a lawyer in town with my arms strapped to my chest, and I signed a durable power of attorney naming my son Dale as my agent. I read it. Every page. I asked questions. I understood that I was handing another man a key to my life, and I handed it to him on purpose, because the alternative was sitting in a cold house being proud. That is not the mistake in this story. I want to say that plainly, because I know some of you are already shaking your heads at me. Giving my son that key was not the mistake. The mistake came 6 weeks later, over pie, and I did not even know I had made it. We were at the Blue Rooster, which is the only place in Cabot Bend where the coffee is honest, and Dale was in a good mood, and he asked me, with his fork in the air, whether that old policy of mine was doing anything for anybody these days. I said it was paid up, and it sat there, and it did not need feeding. And my son said, "Huh." And then he changed the subject so smoothly that I did not think about it again until that night, when I opened the bottom drawer of the desk to put the thermos receipt in the folder where I keep such things, and I saw that the insurance folder was exactly where it always is, and exactly as thick as it always is, and that the very last page in it, the one with the designation on it, was gone. Now, a younger man finds a page missing out of his own drawer, and he goes straight to the telephone and starts accusing people. I did not do that, and it was not because I am a better man. It was because of a rule they beat into me my first week on the job, and it is the single most useful thing anybody ever taught me about human beings. Test your tester. Every lineman carries a meter to tell him whether a wire is live, and before you trust that meter on a wire that can kill you, you touch it to something you already know is hot. Then you test the wire. Then you go back and touch the known hot source again to prove your meter did not quit somewhere in the middle and tell you a comfortable lie. Known good, then unknown, then known good again. 3 touches, every time, 41 years, and I have never once let a man on my crew skip the third one, because the third one is the only part that is about your own equipment instead of the world. So I did not call my son. I called the insurance company. That took most of a morning, because the policy in question was written in 1984 and the company that wrote it has been eaten twice since then, and the number in the front of the folder rings a recording in a state I have never visited. But if you hold on long enough, and if you are polite to everybody, you eventually get handed to a woman in Des Moines, Iowa, named Doreen, who has been doing that job since before the building had computers in it. I want to stop here and give you something useful, because if you take nothing else out of tonight, take this. You are allowed to call your own insurance company and ask them, in your own voice, who is on your policy. You do not need a lawyer to do it, and you do not need permission from anybody. You can ask them to send you a written confirmation of the beneficiary of record and a statement of the policy as it stands today. It is free. It takes about 11 minutes, and every one of you listening ought to do it once a year in the same week you change the batteries in the smoke detectors. I asked Doreen for exactly that. She read it back to me. Policy in force, premiums paid in full since 1996. Owner, Ellis J. Renner, face amount $400,000. Then she stopped. I have listened to a lot of people stop talking over a telephone in my life, mostly wives at 2 in the morning asking me if their husband is the one on the ground. There is a certain kind of silence people make when they are looking at something they were not expecting. She said, "Mr. Renner, there is a note on this policy." I said, "What kind of note?" She said, "I am not able to read you a note over the phone, sir, but I can mail your confirmation to the address of record." And then she paused again and said, "And Mr. Renner, I would like you to look at the address of record with me before we hang up." We did. It was mine. My own mailbox, at the end of my own gravel, with the crooked post my father set. That was the last easy breath I took for a while, because if the address had been wrong, I would have known exactly what I was dealing with, and instead, I knew nothing at all except that a woman 2 states away had gone quiet about a piece of paper with my name on it. 2 days later, a second stranger called. This one was a young fellow, and he was not as good at it. He wanted to confirm my medications. He read 4 of them off a list, and he got 3 right. That was the moment my hands went cold, and I will tell you why. Because it is not the reason you think. It was not that he had my prescriptions. It was that he had them slightly wrong, which meant he had gotten them from a piece of paper somebody had copied by hand in a hurry from a folder that was not his. I thanked him. I wrote the date, the time, the number on the caller identification, and everything I could remember of what he said on a fresh page of a spiral notebook. And then I kept doing that every single time for 11 weeks. Understand, I wrote line reports for 41 years. When a transformer lets go at 2 in the morning in the rain, nobody remembers anything correctly by daylight, so you write it down while it is still ugly. Time, weather, who was on the pole, what the meter said, what you did next. I am not a clever man, but I have a lifetime of practice at being a boring one, and boring is what beats people like the ones who were calling my house. It was Kathy who gave me the word. She came out on a Thursday with a chicken and rice thing in a foil pan, which is what my daughter-in-law does instead of talking about her feelings, and she stood in my kitchen with her coat still on and did not sit down. She said, "Ellis, I am not going to tell you anything about my husband." I said, "All right," she said. "I mean that. I married him. I am not going to be the one who takes him apart to his own father at your kitchen table." And I said, "Kathy, I never asked you to, and I never will." And she looked at the floor for a while, and then she said, "There is a man from St. Louis who has been to our house twice. Dale calls him the provider. That is all. That is the only thing I am going to say, and I am going to go now." And she went. That woman gave me the one word I needed and refused to give me a single one more. And if you want to know what integrity looks like when it is standing in a kitchen with its coat on, that was it. I did not know what a provider was. I went to the library on Friday because Nell had shown me how the computers work there, and because I was not going to have this in my own house, and I typed the word in beside the words life insurance. And I found out what my son had found out about 8 months before me. There is a legal business in this country where investors buy life insurance policies off of living people. You sell them your policy for cash today. They pay your premiums from then on. And when you die, they collect the whole face amount. It has been legal for 30 years. It is regulated by the state. There are honest people in it, and it has saved some families who needed money more than they needed a death benefit. But here is the arithmetic of it, and nobody says the arithmetic out loud. The less time a man is expected to live, the more his policy is worth to them. That is not a slander. That is the entire business model. Somewhere in an office, there is a person whose job is to take a stack of paper about you, your age, your surgeries, your prescriptions, the way you sounded on a telephone when a polite stranger asked how your breathing had been, and turn it into a number of months. And that number of months is the price. Every 90 days going forward. They were not checking on me. They were checking the clock. I sat in the library with my hat in my lap for a long while after that, and I am not too proud to tell you that what I felt first was not anger. What I felt first was embarrassment. A hot, ugly embarrassment, like a man who has walked around all day with his shirt button wrong. Because somewhere in this county there was a folder with my name on the tab, and in that folder there was a number, and the number was what I would be worth if I died approximately on schedule. And my son had built that folder, and I had been eating pie with him. The following Saturday, he borrowed my truck to haul folding chairs. He brought it back with the tank full, which he always does, and when I went out that evening to get my gloves off the floorboard, there was a manila envelope wedged half under the passenger seat where it had slid on the turn at the low-water bridge. It was not sealed. It had already been opened by him. Inside, there was a single sheet on the letterhead of a firm in Illinois that does what they call life expectancy underwriting. It had my name on it, spelled right. It had my date of birth. It had a paragraph about my shoulder and a paragraph about my father's heart. And down at the bottom, in a box, all by itself, there was a number. 51 months. I did the thing I am telling all of you not to do. I want that on the record before I tell it so that nobody thinks I am standing up here pretending I was calm the whole way through. I put that sheet of paper in my coat, and I drove to my son's house on a Sunday afternoon, and I put it on his kitchen table. I have replayed that hour a great many times. What I expected was that he would go white. What I expected was shouting or lying or one of those long silences where a man decides which version of himself he is going to be. What I got was a folder. Dale went into the other room and came back with a folder, and he sat down across from me, and he opened it, and he started laying paper out on the table one sheet at a time, the way you would deal a hand of cards to somebody you love. The durable power of attorney. Signed by me, in January, in front of a lawyer and a notary, with my good hand. The medical release I signed at the clinic, the one that lets the office share records with a family member so they can talk to the surgeon when you are asleep. My initials on it, 3 places. A page from the insurance company titled Policy Review Request, with my initials at the bottom, dated the 9th of February. I stared at that last one a long time, and then I remembered it. I remembered him bringing me a stack of papers in the recliner with my arms strapped down and the pain pills making the room soft, and I remembered him saying propane, taxes, and one from the insurance people, and I remembered initialing all of them because I trusted the hand that was holding the pen steady for me. He had not forged a thing. That is what I want you to sit with. There was not one crooked signature in that whole folder. And he was not even angry. That was the part that took the floor out from under me. My son sat there in a clean shirt on a Sunday and explained it to me the way a good salesman explains a furnace. He said, "Dad, you are sitting on an asset you will never use." He said, "That money does me no good in 30 years. It does me good now. Nell is going to want a house. Kathy's mother is going into a place in the fall and somebody has to write that check," he said. "And I would rather have taken a slap," he said. "Nobody is hurting you. Nothing happens to you at all. You just stop being the one who benefits." I said, "A man called my house to ask how I was breathing." And Dale said, "That is standard." Standard. I had been on the ground when a line came down on a hay truck. I know what it is to have your stomach go somewhere your feet cannot follow. That is what Standard did to me. I got up. I did not take my paper back off his table, which was foolish, and I drove home in the dark with the window down because the truck felt too small. And somewhere on the highway between his mailbox and mine, I quit being a father who had been wronged and started being a foreman with a problem. Because here is the other thing. 41 years on a line will teach you. When something is energized and you do not know why, you do not stand there arguing with the wire. The wire does not care. You go find out where it is fed from. So I went and found out where it was fed from. And I am going to tell you exactly how, because it was not clever and it was not fast, and any one of you could do all of it. First, I wrote to the insurance company. On paper, in an envelope, certified, with the little green card that comes back with a stranger's signature on it, I asked for 3 things: a confirmation of the beneficiary of record, a copy of every request made on my policy in the past year and who made it, and a statement of whether any change of ownership had been filed. Second, I drove to the county seat and went into the Recorder of Deeds office, which in Missouri is where a power of attorney gets recorded when it touches real estate, and mine did, because of the 40 acres my father left me. A woman with reading glasses on a chain pulled it in about 4 minutes and made me a certified copy for a couple of dollars. I sat in my truck in that parking lot and read my own power of attorney all the way through for the second time in my life. And there it was. Or rather, there it was not. Missouri, like a lot of states, has a short list of things an agent cannot do for you no matter how broad the rest of the document sounds. They are sometimes called the express powers because the document has to say them out loud. Making gifts is one. Creating or changing a trust is one. And one of them, sitting right there in the statute in plain language, is the power to designate or change the designation of a beneficiary to receive property at the principal's death. My document did not contain that sentence. The lawyer had not included it because I had not asked for it, because I had walked in there with a torn shoulder wanting somebody to be able to pay the propane man. I had given my son the key to my truck. He had driven it to a place I never said he could go. Third, I hired a lawyer of my own. Her name is Ruby Sandoval, and she practices elder law in Springfield, and the reason I trusted her is that she opened our first meeting with 2 things I did not want to hear. She said, "This will take longer than you think it should, and there will be weeks where nothing happens, and you will believe I have forgotten you." And she said, "Mr. Renner, whichever way this goes, you may lose your son. I am not able to fix that part. I want you to decide right now whether you can live in the house that is on the other side of this. I thought about it for the length of one cup of bad coffee, and then I told her about the lock. I told her that the reason a lineman hangs his own padlock is not because he does not trust the crew. It is because trust is a wonderful thing to have and a terrible thing to stand on. You hang the lock so that being wrong about somebody is survivable. She wrote that down. I noticed she wrote it down. Now, before I tell you what came back in the mail on the last Thursday in April, I am going to ask you for one small thing, and then I am not going to ask you for anything else for the rest of the night. If you have made it this far with me, subscribe. That is all. It costs you nothing. It keeps an old man company, and I would like to know you are there for the part that comes next. Because what came back in that envelope changed the shape of everything, and it had been sitting in a filing cabinet in Des Moines, Iowa, waiting since the spring my wife died. The confirmation ran 2 pages. The first page was ordinary. Owner, Ellis J. Renner. Face amount, $400,000. Paid up. The second page had one line on it that had a word in it I had not thought about in 27 years. Beneficiary of record, Nell Marie Renner, granddaughter. Designation filed the 3rd of August, 1999. Designation type, irrevocable. Irrevocable. I sat down on the porch step with my mail in my lap, and I was, for about a minute and a half, a man of 50 years old again, standing in an insurance office on the square with sawdust still on my boots, 4 months after I buried my wife. Ruth had made me promise. Not a soft promise either. She was down to 80-some pounds, and she had the clarity that comes to people at the end, the kind that goes through you like a light. And she said, Ellis, that policy is the only thing left standing, and you are going to be lonesome, and people are going to be kind to you. And I did what she asked. I drove down, and I sat with a young agent, and I told him I wanted it put on the baby. And he said, well, we can name her. And I said, no, son, I want it fixed. I want it so it cannot be moved. And that young man said, Mr. Renner, do you understand that if we file it this way, you cannot change it, you cannot borrow against it, you cannot cash it in, you cannot sell it, not without her written consent, and she is 2 years old. And I said, that is the point. I am hanging my lock on it. He wrote it up. He filed it. 1999. That policy could not be sold to anybody, for any price, by anybody, without a signed and notarized consent from a 28-year-old apprentice lineman who was at that moment somewhere on the west side of the county replacing a crossarm in the rain. Which meant my son was not going to be able to steal it. Which meant, and this is the part I understood about 4 seconds later, sitting on that step with the mail sliding off my knees, that my son was going to have to ask his own daughter to hand it to him. Nell came out to my place the next Wednesday with her hair still flat from the hard hat and a grease mark on her jaw, and she ate 2 pork chops and told me about a squirrel that had put 400 homes in the dark, and then she said, oh, Daddy wants me to come by the office Friday and sign a couple things for you. I kept my fork moving. That is a skill. It is not a good skill, and I am not proud of it, but I have it. I said, sign what, honey? She said, insurance stuff for your care. He said, it is so. There is money for you if you need a place later on. She said it exactly the way a person says a thing they have not thought about, because why would she? She is 28. Her father told her that her grandfather might need a nursing home someday and that there was paperwork. There is not a decent young woman in this country who would not have said yes to that. And I sat there across the table from her with the number 51 in my head. 51 months on a page in Illinois. 51 years old, my son, in a clean shirt saying nobody is hurting you. I want to tell you what I decided, and I want to tell you how long it took, because it took the whole rest of that dinner and 2 cups of coffee afterward. I could have said nothing and simply blocked it. I had Ruby. I had the certified copies. I could have let Friday happen, let my granddaughter sign a paper she did not understand, and then had it undone later by people in an office, and she would never once have had to know what her father is. That was a real option. Some of you would have taken it, and I do not think you would be wrong to. Here is why I did not. Because she was going to find out anyway. They always find out. And the only thing I would have accomplished is that on the day she found out, she would also find out that her grandfather had watched her walk into it and had let her, to spare himself an evening. That is not protection. That is just borrowing against somebody else's tomorrow so you can have a quiet tonight. So I got up and I got the padlock down off the nail and I put it on the table between us next to the salt. I said, Nell, I need to teach you something that is not in your apprentice book. And I told her. I told her all of it, in order, in plain words, and I did not soften the parts about her daddy, and I did not sharpen them either. The phone calls, the health update, the library, the number of months, the folder on the Sunday table with my own initials all over it, the word irrevocable, and a young man in an office in 1999, and a 2-year-old with jam on her face, who was the whole reason her grandmother could let go. She did not cry until that last part. Then she cried the way linemen cry, which is with her jaw locked and her hands flat on the table. And then she asked me the question, and I have thought about that question nearly every day since. She said, "Grandpa, is he a bad man, or is he just scared?" And I could have given her something comfortable. Lord knows I wanted to. I said, "No, he is scared. Your daddy has been scared since he was 24 years old, driving your grandmother to Springfield and watching her get smaller in the seat beside him. Scared is where it starts, and scared is not a sin, and everybody in this family has been scared." I said, "But bad is what a man builds on top of scared when he decides he is not going to say it out loud to anybody." He did not wake up one day wanting to sell his father. He woke up owing money he could not say out loud, and then he found a legal way to make it somebody else's problem, and then he called it standard. And she said, "So what do I do?" And I put my hand on the padlock. I said, "Do you know why you hang your own lock instead of letting the foreman hang one for the whole crew?" She said, "Because the foreman can be wrong." I said, "No. The foreman is usually right. You hang your own because you are the one who is going to be standing on the wire. Nobody gets to take a risk on your behalf and then apologize afterward, and nobody takes your lock off but you. Not your foreman, not your best friend, not your father, not me." Then I went and got the second one out of the shop drawer, brass, number 11, still in the paper. It came in from the co-op supply room in 1981, and I put it in her hand. I said, "That one is yours. Do not ever let anybody talk you out of hanging it. And do not you dare hang it on something just because a man you love is standing there waiting." She turned it over twice, and then she put it in her jacket pocket, and she said, "Friday." I said, "Friday." Now, I would love to tell you that the two of us made a plan that night the way they do in the pictures. We did not. What I actually did was call Ruby Sandoval at 7 the next morning and do everything she told me, which was mostly waiting, which I hated. But there was a clock running, and it was not mine. Ruby explained it to me. These offers expire. The investors on the other end price a policy off a number of months, and that number is only good for so long before their own people make them do it over. Somewhere in a spreadsheet, my file had a date on it, and after that date, the whole thing had to be re-underwritten, which meant more phone calls, more months, more chances for somebody to look too close. And my son had promised them a consent he did not have. So he moved everything up. He had been building toward this all spring, and I had not let myself see it for what it was. He had leased the old jeweler's storefront on the north side of the courthouse square. He had a sign painted, gold letters on a green field, Renner Benefit Group, with his own name on it a foot tall. And the Chamber of Commerce had a ribbon cutting scheduled, with the oversized scissors they keep in a case at the bank and a sheet cake from the grocery and the county paper sending a girl with a camera. Saturday morning, 10 o'clock, coffee and cookies, everybody welcome. And at 11, in the back office of that same building, with the cake still on the table out front, he had scheduled the closing. That is a real thing, by the way, and I did not know it either. When one of these sales funds, the money does not go from the investor to you across a handshake, it goes into escrow with an independent agent who is licensed by the state, and that agent does not release $1 until the file is clean. Signatures, disclosures, the rescission notice, and a verification of coverage from the insurance company itself confirming what the policy actually is and who is actually on it. My son had a room, a notary, a cake, a newspaper, and a daughter who thought she was helping her grandfather. What he did not have was the last piece of paper, and he had told them he could get it. I want you to know what I did with that information because it is the least dramatic thing in this entire story, and it is the part I am proudest of. I did not call him. I did not warn him. I did not stand in the square with a sign, and I did not, God help me, drive over there and put my hands on my own son. I wrote one letter. Ruby drafted it, and I signed it, and we sent it certified. 2 copies, one to the insurance company and one to the escrow agent whose name was on the closing notice. It contained no accusations, no adjectives, and nothing about my feelings. It contained a certified copy of the beneficiary confirmation, a certified copy of my recorded power of attorney with the express powers section underlined, and one sentence stating that I was the owner of the policy, that I had given no consent, and that I intended to be present. Then I made one telephone call, and it was to Des Moines, Iowa. I asked for Doreen. It took a while. I said, "Ma'am, if somebody in a room in Missouri asks you to read out what is on my policy out loud, will you do it?" And it was a pause. And then that woman said something I have thought about ever since. She said, "Mr. Renner, I have worked this desk for 31 years and I have never once been asked that question. I do not read files to rooms. I read files to owners. And I said, well, I am the owner, and I will be in the room. And Doreen said, then, sir, you call me Saturday and you put me on your speaker and I will read every line of it. Saturday came up clear and cool, the kind of morning that makes an old man believe his shoulder is fine. There were maybe 60 people on the square by 10. The chamber brought the big scissors. There was a sheet cake from the grocery with green icing to match the sign, and somebody had run an extension cord out the front door for the coffee urn, badly, and I stood there for a full minute looking at that cord across the sidewalk thinking, 41 years, and this is what is going to kill somebody in this town. My son gave a little speech. I heard most of it. He thanked the chamber and he thanked Kathy, and he said the word community 4 times, and he was good at it. He has always been good with people. That was never a lie. Then the scissors and the picture for the paper, and everybody went inside for cake. At 5 minutes till 11, I walked in the front door with Ruby Sandoval on my left in a gray suit and my granddaughter on my right in her work clothes because she had come straight off a job and had not changed, and she had her hard hat under her arm like a football. Dale saw us from the back hallway. I have watched a lot of men understand a lot of bad things in a hurry, and I have never seen it happen faster than it happened on my son's face. He did not know how much I knew. He only knew that his father had brought a lawyer to a cake. The back office was small. There was a folding table, 6 chairs, a laptop propped open with a man from St. Louis on the screen, and a notary from the title company named Arlene, who has known me since Ruth's funeral and who would not look at me. And at the head of the table, there was a woman I had never met, about 50, in a raincoat she did not take off, with a black folder squared up in front of her. Marisol Farrow. Independent escrow agent, licensed by the state, and the only person in that room whose signature actually moved money. Dale said, Dad, this is a private meeting. And Mrs. Farrow said, without looking up, Mr. Renner is the policy owner. He is not a guest here. That was the first crack, and it was not even loud. She said, before we do anything else, I need to tell everyone in this room that I received a certified letter on Thursday. And I need to tell you that this morning I received the verification of coverage from the carrier, and there is a flag on it, and until that flag is resolved, I am not able to release funds. The man on the laptop said, what kind of flag? And I said, may I use the speaker on that telephone? I want to describe the next 4 minutes carefully because there was no shouting in them and nobody stood up, and it was the most complete thing I have ever watched happen to a room. I dialed Des Moines, Iowa. I asked for Doreen. She came on the line and I said, ma'am, this is Ellis Renner. I am the owner of the policy. There are 6 people in this room, and I would like you to read the record. And a woman none of us could see, sitting at a desk in another state, read my life out loud in a flat voice with a keyboard clicking underneath it. Policy in force. Owner, Ellis J. Renner. Face amount, $400,000. Premiums paid in full. Beneficiary of record, Nell Marie Renner. Designation filed the 3rd of August, 1999. Designation type, irrevocable. And then she said the sentence, and the keyboard stopped while she said it. She said, per the terms of this contract, no change of beneficiary, no policy loan, no surrender for cash value, and no assignment or transfer of ownership may be effected without the written and notarized consent of the irrevocable beneficiary. There is no consent of record on this file. Nobody said anything for a while. The man on the laptop leaned back out of the frame, and we could hear him talking to somebody behind him. Mrs. Farrow closed her black folder, and she said, then this file does not fund, and she said it the way a person says the mail comes at 11. And my son turned to his daughter. I want to be careful here. He did not lunge, and he did not beg. He picked up the pen that was already lying on the table, and he held it out to her, handle first, the way you hand somebody a tool, and he said, Nell. Just her name. And my granddaughter stood there in her work boots with her hard hat under her arm and looked at her father for what felt like a very long time. And she said, Daddy, I am not signing. And then she said, the thing that I did not teach her, that she came up with standing in that room, and it is the only sentence out of this whole business that I would want written down anywhere. She said, he hung it. It is not mine to take off. Dale put the pen down. Oh! And then my son, 51 years old, in his new green shirt with his own name a foot tall on the window behind him, sat down in a folding chair in the back of his own office and put both hands over his face. Nobody enjoyed it. I want you to know that. There was no moment in that room where anybody was glad. The notary picked up her stamp and left. The girl from the paper never knew a thing, and the picture ran on Wednesday with a nice caption. I did not press charges. I want to be honest about why, and it is not because I am kind. Ruby told me plainly that what happened was serious, that misusing an agent's authority against an older adult is not a family disagreement in this state, that I had a case, and that if I brought it, it would be out of my hands from that day forward, and my granddaughter would spend her 20s being asked questions about her father in a hallway. So here is what we did instead, and every piece of it is something any of you could do on a weekday. I revoked the power of attorney in writing, signed and notarized, and I recorded the revocation at the Recorder of Deeds office in the same book where the original was, so that any bank or company that goes looking will find the ending attached to the beginning. That cost me $9. I sent a copy of the revocation to every institution that had ever seen the original, and I filed a complaint with the state insurance department about the licensed agent who worked that file, the one who wrote up an old man he never spoke to and took a consent on faith because there was a commission at the end of it. Not about my son, about the professional, because that man is going to do it again to somebody who does not have a padlock, and he was the only person in the whole chain who had taken an oath. Then I sat in my kitchen and made the only condition I made. I told Dale he had to tell Kathy himself, all of it out loud at their own table, and I told him he had to tell Nell what he had been about to ask her to do and why, without one word about how hard things had been for him. He did both. It took him 9 days to do the second one, and I know because Nell called me on the 9th day. The office on the square lasted until August. He sold the lease, he took a job with an outfit in Springfield doing something with commercial fleets, and he drives an hour and 10 each way, which is almost exactly what he used to drive with his mother on Tuesdays. I have never once said that to him, and I never will. It is 11 months now. I would like to tell you, it is all mended. It is not. My son comes out on Sundays and we talk about the truck and the weather and the price of everything, and there is a room in the conversation we both walk around, and we may walk around it for the rest of my life. Some things do not heal, some things scar over and hold, and holding is not nothing. Kathy still brings the chicken and rice thing. She has never once mentioned that Thursday in my kitchen, and neither have I, and about a month ago, she started staying to eat. Nell topped out of her apprenticeship in March. They have a training pole in the yard at the co-op, an old one they keep for the new hands, with a switch and a hasp on it that goes nowhere and does nothing. It is a teaching pole. It has been there since before I hired on. The morning she topped out, I drove down there with my brass number 7 in my coat pocket, and we walked out to that pole, and I hung my lock on that hasp, and then Nell hung hers next to it. Number 11. And she took out her pocket knife and scratched the date on the back of her tag, because I never did give her a carpenter's pencil. Her father was standing at the bottom holding the ladder. He had asked to come. He did not say much. When she came down, he handed her the water jug and said, "That was clean work," and she said, "Thanks, Daddy," and that was the entire conversation, and it was more than I expected to get in this life. So here is what I have got for you, and then I will let you go. Everybody talks about a will. A will is a fine thing and you ought to have one. But a will only speaks about the things nobody has already spoken for. Your insurance, your retirement, the little account at the bank with the payable on death line on it, those do not care what your will says. Those go to the name on the form. The name on the form beats the lawyer's paper every single time, and most people in this country have not looked at those forms since the year they signed them. Go look at yours. Call them yourself, in your own voice, and ask who is on there. Do it the week you change the smoke alarm batteries. And if you sign a power of attorney, and I hope you do, because the alternative is a court doing it for you, then read the part that lists what your agent cannot do unless you say so out loud. That list is short, and it is there for a reason, and it is the difference between handing somebody your keys and handing somebody your name. Talk to a real lawyer. Not me. I climb poles. Ruth has been gone 27 years this April, and I still think the smartest thing she ever did was refuse to be talked out of an inconvenient promise while she still had a voice to make it with. A line is not dead because somebody tells you it is dead. You test it, and you ground it, and you hang your own lock, and you write the date on the tag in your own hand where a stranger can read it after you are gone. There are 2 locks on that pole now. Mine is not the last one anymore. And I have never in my life slept better than I have since I found that out.